joining us, all of the millions out there who are watching this who laughed. Welcome to our panel discussion today called Victims' Voices Leading the Way, commemorating the UN World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. We're honored to host various community partners and friends here at the Capitol, all of you and our esteemed panel, grateful for all of your contributions to the fight against global human trafficking. We also welcome any and all friends and members of the public joining us via Facebook, Instagram, YouTube Live. We're happy to have you. Hope this will be a great opportunity to learn about our office, our efforts to combat human trafficking, and how we all together can better support survivors of trafficking. Human trafficking, as we all realize here, is one of, if not the greatest threats to human rights worldwide. And really all of us are potential victims of trafficking, all of our children, grandchildren, all of our loved ones, and we ourselves. And this is not, I want to be abundantly clear, sometimes in our office we have to deal with political things. This is not a political thing, at least not a partisan political thing. It's not a Democrat issue or Republican issue. This is a human rights issue. It's a humanity, people coming together. And because it can affect all of us from every different walk of life, it doesn't matter how rich you are or not, where you live, urban, rural, suburban, it doesn't matter your background, your orientation, your gender, your racial or religious beliefs. We are all possible potential victims, and because of that, we need to all come together in a community. President Barack Obama used to say there cannot be any daylight between us on issues like these, and I agree with that. So, with that, let me introduce the panelists who will help guide us from each a unique perspective. We tried to bring people with different backgrounds in the fight. For those who've been involved in the fight, people like Congressman Chris Smith, who've been doing this for 30 years, and were there when the TDPA was first enacted at the federal level. He knows this well. You need people in every different facet of life to be able to come together. So the business community, along with policymakers, law enforcement, and certainly all of those partners who help with recovery and who help with support, education. So all of that combined, we hope you'll get a perspective today. I will lead the discussion, asking some penetrating questions. Already warned them, I'm going to put them on the spot, make this really difficult for the panelists. Not true. Our first panelist in order from my left going down is January Riggin. January, wave high. You can hold your applause until after I'm done introducing all of the panelists, and then we'll give them some recognition. January is the founder and executive director of Stoke to Hope, a local nonprofit that builds awareness to provide support for victims and survivors of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. Next, Carlos Garcia is interim director at the local Youth Resource Center for Volunteers of America in Utah, where he has worked for over 4 years and helps support at-risk and homeless youth to improve their lives. Carlos, welcome. Renee Le Grant is the survivor leader and acting executive director of Journey of Hope, and is looking forward to leading their newly formed anti-trafficking section. Renee, thank you for being with us today. And finally, somebody that I get to work with on almost a daily basis, Nate Mutter, who's our Assistant Chief of Investigations in the Investigations Division of the Utah Attorney General's Office, works closely and helps oversee our secure strike force that the state legislature created to marshal all assets together in one agency so that we can focus and gain expertise, and that's what we're doing in large part to the efforts of people like Nate here in our office. So with that, I'm going to ask a question, and I can take, any of you can answer the question, so there's no set order. It's not like a debate where, we'll jump in, chime in. If one of you is dominating the conversation, Nate, then I'll make sure that I try to get everyone's information perspective. So this is an interesting one to start off. It's a simple question, or the answer is a little more complex, I think. What is human trafficking and what isn't human trafficking? It would be interesting to see how all of you would answer that compared to how our panelists would. Anybody want to jump in and volunteer to answer that first? What is or isn't human trafficking? Carlos, you made eye contact.
Yeah, so one of the things that we have to recognize with human trafficking is that there's subcategories, right? So there's sex trafficking, there's work trafficking, there's trafficking in regards of like drug trafficking and using humans to do those things. And most importantly, what we have to recognize there is the victim. The victim is really the person that we have to give the most spotlight to, because what's happening in this situation or in these situations is that there is a perpetrator or predator that is coercing or manipulating and using force to get somebody to be a victim of the trafficking that they're going to institute on them. And so out of those three categories, those are things that we're seeing just all the time, everywhere. And like Sean was saying, it's not discriminatory towards anybody. It's in our neighborhoods, it's in the city, it's out in places that a lot of people don't go visit. It's everywhere, and it's a global issue as well. So that would be my response in regards to the definition of what trafficking is in general, specifically to humans. And yeah, it's a really dangerous thing. And when you're in the types of services that we're in, with everybody that's up here, it's really scary to find out how far and broad human trafficking is reaching. And it's just something that exists like on a day-to-day basis. So that would be excellent insight on that.
Hi, I'm January.
Yeah, you two are sharing that.
We're sharing this. I get so nervous with microphones around. It's the modern day slavery, but I think that people forget that, I'm an organization that does a lot of ground zero. We do night street outreach for this population in our community, and we believe that if you don't combat local trafficking, you're never going to combat local trafficking, because your neighborhoods, your children, your community is the perfect ingredient for predators, and we forget that there's so many, like Carlos talked about, levels of trafficking. There's familiar trafficking, right, where it's generational. Your family's trafficking at you, or your mom's been out there in sex work for a long time, and that's just been bled into your home, and it becomes this pathway into trafficking. Or maybe you have chosen to do sex trade work, right? And we get really caught in that sex work is the main focus in our community, and that it's the one, it's this low end, and that they're the problem, and then we forget that there's trafficking, and that they're behind the scenes, and there's these things that are going on with youth and children, women, men, LGBT community, trans, and we get caught up in these certain stereotypes, which is on here, but I look at it as I didn't know I was being trafficked until years later, because that's not the word they used back in the day, was trafficking. And so I think the awareness of what human trafficking it is, being a voice for human trafficking, and learning about human trafficking is where we're going to break this stigma.
And January, you referenced it, this misconceptions and stereotypes. Let's just work that into, this is kind of the same question. What do they believe or understand about trafficking? What is it? What isn't it? Talk to us about that. And Renee, if you have some thoughts about it, we would love to hear from you.
I just want to touch back on the question you asked before, and just make it a little personal so it can hit home. So I didn't know I was being groomed. I was 16. I didn't know I was being groomed. And for what reason was I out there in the first place? Something must have happened in my home to make me feel that I need to go out there. So there was some type of trauma that kept me looking for stuff elsewhere, love elsewhere. I didn't know I was being groomed, and then by the time I figured out what was happening, I was drug addicted, and going from state to state and doing what I was told to do. I really didn't think that was happening, you know what I mean? Because I was promised all these gorgeous things, clothes, traveling, jewelry, stuff like that. I got that, but it wasn't for what I thought it was for. It was for to make me look so I could, sell my wares. So we had to look at what happens for these young ladies, because we work with them in JTS, what happened in their home to make them want to leave there and go turn to this situation.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Anyway,
Nate, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the clock.
He told us all to pull out a timer when we started.
It's usually the opposite. That's why he's laughing so much.
So one thing I wanted to touch on as far as stereotypes go, because we've spent a lot of time and effort training local law enforcement on human trafficking, what it is and what it isn't. And several years ago, you would approach someone being trafficked, especially when we're talking about sex work. Oh, they're just a prostitute. They're just doing this because they want to. They're consenting to this. And experience tells you 100% the opposite. When someone says prostitution, I think exploitation, or I think victimization. What police officers at times don't seem to understand is that forced fraud or coercion piece that Carlos discussed, from the trafficker to the survivor. And that is one thing that we've spent a lot of time here in Utah doing, is trying to change that stereotype within law enforcement, so that law enforcement, when they approach victims of human trafficking, they treat them as such, and instead of thinking, oh, just a prostitute.
And a follow-up question, and I'm looking for a particular answer, so if you don't give it, I'll just give it. Putting you on the spot. So a lot of people have seen the movie Taken, right? And when we ask them about trafficking, they're like, oh yeah, like Liam Neeson and Taken. And not every trafficking case obviously involves abduction, although many abductions are part of trafficking enterprise. Nate, you worked in the office on the Victor Rax case, 2014. It was the largest case in the United States. Dozens of victims that came forward, hundreds more in Salt Lake County that were identified. Where were most of those victims trafficked? Were they abducted? Where was the forced fraud and coercion occurring for these young men? Some as young as 11, 12 years old.
Within their own neighborhood.
Right.
There was no, there is that common misconception that trafficking takes place when someone is abducted, similar to that movie. I've heard that over and over again. We see something completely different from the law enforcement side. Just as Renee talked about being groomed, the trafficker, Victor Rax, in that situation, groomed his victims for 20 years. And he had a specific age range of victims that he liked to groom. And all of those victims came from the neighborhood, came from the Salt Lake City area. And as the victims aged out of what he liked, more kids came through. And, so it was a lot of that grooming process that the kids don't understand what's going on with them. And they're easily manipulated and exploited to do the trafficker's work.
And he was forcing them not just to have sex, but needles, drugs.
And Carlos touched on that a little bit with the drug trafficking. It is a labor trafficking issue. The labor doesn't have to be legal labor. So when Victor Rax was having children sell his drugs, that was that form of exploitation and trafficking that he had the kids do. And part of that forced fraud and coercion was the sexual abuse that occurred.
And the sexual abuse occurred often in their own beds, in their own homes. To the point Nate was making, who's happening in our backyard, it's happening there. It doesn't have to be an abduction, or it happens because parents may be out working 2 or 3 jobs trying to make ends meet, and those kids are vulnerable, and predators can profile them and are excellent at victimizing them. what is the most common type of human trafficking? People ask that all the time. And by the way, everyone thinks sex trafficking is the only form of trafficking. Anyone want to jump in? Renee, January, Carlos, any of you? What do you see the most happening here on our streets in Utah?
Yeah, I'll take this from just the perspective that I have. So, at the Youth Resource Center, we're serving at-risk and homeless youth. And what we do see a lot of is sex trafficking. Some of the other things that we see as well is work trafficking. In the realm of sex trafficking, it's hard enough for the youth that we're serving to experience something as hard as homelessness, and then to also have to experience something along the lines of like sex trafficking or work trafficking. And what Renee was talking about was so true to what's going on out there is this grooming. So you take a youth that's already extremely vulnerable, well, you just you put something out that's shiny for them and start to pull in their attention and make all these promises, and then they get stuck into the situation. And when they're stuck in that, it's incredibly hard to get out. There have been many situations where we've come across clients that are being sex trafficked, and they literally will not say a single word because of the threats that have been made to their life. And it's hard to see that. And it's so scary for them because in one aspect they want help and they want support, but it's to the degree of like their life being at risk. And if I get help, if I get that support that I need, then my life's also at risk because this person may come and kill me or follow through on the threats that they've made. Something we're seeing a lot of that's going on right now is with a lot of the camps that are around the city with the homeless camps. There's a lot of sex trafficking that's going on in those realms. We've seen an increase of sex trafficking reports from our youth reporting that they're being sex trafficked or they know of a peer that's being sex trafficked, and the perpetrator is staying in these camps with them. We really have to do something on a statewide level to really support the homeless community and make sure that we're providing safe spaces, that there are going to be staff and people there to keep that safety presence. In these camps, it's literally moving a camp where there's sex trafficking going on from one block to the next block, and it just goes over and over and over again, right? In regards to work trafficking, it is not uncommon for us to see clients at our center that are sometimes coming from out of the country, and they've literally been forced to go around the entire country and do hard labor, and they're not getting paid. There's not a single ounce of money that they're getting from that. They're literally providing free labor. And if by chance they end up finding out where our center is and who we are, sure, they'll show up, but then there comes in the manipulation and the coercion and just forcing them to do something that they don't want to do. If you have somebody that's in the country and they're undocumented, then you can hold that over their head, right? And you can force them to do a million different things because of that. And it doesn't always have to be somebody that's from a foreign country. It could also be people just here in the U.S. that are also citizens, putting things over their head to be able to force and manipulate them to do things that they don't want to do. And so it really comes down to this piece of January said earlier, it's modern day slavery. And the victims, sometimes I hear this thing of that they're providing a service. They're not providing a service. They're being forced to do something that they don't want to do. And there's no service in that whatsoever. So that's a lot of what we're seeing right now, and just kind of my thoughts on that.
One, just follow up to your point on labor exploitation. Many of the victims are undocumented or are out of status, hyper vulnerable, but many are legal. We just had a case up here that our office did with Carnival. They were all here legally. They had papers, but the owner would hold that and not allow them to have access to it, and would say, look, we'll send you back. And so even those who are legal at times are extremely vulnerable, and I think, again, in terms of misperceptions, people always have these notions like, oh, those are just illegal immigrants, and often it can be anybody. Yeah. Keep going. I asked a question.
I would really like to bring light to probably one of the most common in the U.S. or globally of trafficking is the number one trafficker is silence. Like my trafficker was silence. Like that was my first trafficker when I was younger is silence, is that we don't tell on our grandpa that molested us, mom doesn't report and stand up with us, continued molestation, incest, and rapes in the home, childhood trauma, ending up in schools and becoming the slut or these things or the stigma that comes along with that because her emotions are irregulated, her distorted sex thought process, not feeling welcome at home. I would have rather been on the streets than at home. And so that population gathered me and I owed them something, right? And my trafficker, I went back to 6 years at the age of as a teen, and I ended up going to prison for my trafficker at 16. And I was muling, and I was doing these things, and I had a female trafficker, and it's emotional for me because she loved me, and I loved her, and she died probably like 10 years ago, and it was a really emotional spot for me to be. And I think people get in these places that you don't understand that these people have come from shattered, broken homes and being silent, never heard, and and the system has been shattered for a long time. And I love that there's more awareness, there's more training, and there's more campaigns going on, but there is a shattered system for victims. If a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old can walk into an abortion clinic with just cash and no parents and sign and there's nobody reporting that, like our system is shattered, right? Like if they're walking, if they're going and reporting, I have so many victims that we work with at night that they report rapes and law enforcement takes 2 hours to show up, and then they find out they have a criminal background and they think they're lying, or they don't get the same treatment that if somebody in Continent Heights would have reported rape, right? And so, we do that street level outreach and those trends of like, it's only in low-end communities. It's, I know a woman that's gotten trafficked by high school boys that would take her home to their uncles and get them drunk. And then she's now become this trafficked victim and they took pictures of her, right? And so now they've used those pictures against her, and then she ends up in these areas, which is at-risk youth or now living on the streets, and it becomes more welcoming in an object and feels like that's all she's worth and becomes the perfect ingredient for more traffickers, more than low-end pimps, or that it only happens in these areas, or if she's addicted, or if she, and I feel like we need to break those campaigns, right? Like she's just a prostitute, right? Like and it's good to hear that there's different avenues going and that we're trying to combat that differently, right? And stop some of these stereotypes, some of these trends, or that it's not going to be talked about in school. Because now like if you talk about suicide in school, or if you talk about sex ed, you're inviting sex ed or that. No, these kids they're being taught by internet anyways, right? Like they should hear it from safety and people and programs and resources and advocacy, so that they know that there's options if you get in those situations or if you feel in those situations, and that we're working as a whole to combat this situation happening in Utah.
I just want to touch on this part. I don't know if we're going to touch on it today or not, but let's talk about the people or the people who come to buy sex from the young girls. Places like the domestic violence shelters, or even where Carlos works, it's not safe, because if they can park across the street and wait for you to come out, and then you call the police say that there's nothing they can do because he's just sitting there, but he's a tracker. What more do we have to do? I'm not looking at you. What more needs to be done? And if to me, I'm going to say John's never get caught, never get reported. I've never heard, maybe a couple. I've never seen it on the news. And if they do get caught, it's like far and few in between. If we do something about those, we might can help our ladies even better.
Public communication.
Yes.
By the way, just on that for Renee, so she knows, federal legislation that's in the works right now, supported by nearly every state, including Utah, has increased the penalties for John finally to felony level degrees, so that they're not just, constantly getting slapped on the wrist or
Right.
gunned. So you have to go after traffickers, you have to go after Johns, and you have to make sure you don't re-victimize the victims. To
Right.
January's point, she
Right.
went to prison for her trafficker, and now in Utah, her record can be expunged. Before, that would follow her for the rest of her life. So I'm glad you brought that up, Renee. That's so important, such an important perspective. I don't know if we want to hear from you on the catching all these stairs.
Well, that's why we do training, right? That's why we're trying to train the police officers to see them in a different light. And I wanted to touch on something that January said. It kind of sparked a thought. When we are doing training, as far as stereotypes go, on victims of human trafficking are only the lower socioeconomic classes and things of that nature. I combat that argument with anyone who has a vulnerability can be trafficked.
Absolutely.
And that goes through every socioeconomic status, every racial line, everything. If you have a vulnerability, a trafficker, if they can hone in on that vulnerability, they'll hold it over their head, and they will get them to do stuff that they wouldn't normally do. And again, that is something we try and impress upon the police officers so that they understand from a different viewpoint that vulnerabilities create trafficking situations.
Right. And it happens everywhere. Like the victims that we spoke with, like a girl, she's pretty close to me, that was rescued out of a high-end hotel here at Grand America, right? And then there was the one that was, trafficked in behind it, found dead behind a dumpster, in a train storm. Like those, it's not only hard meeting the trafficker, but it's that I think the part that we need to share is that healing for victims is it's a process, right? My trafficking, I don't want to say my age, but my trafficking happened a lot, and the healing process is still very damaging. It's still damaging, but to hear that there's more training and more awareness, and because I don't know how many times that I was more reported as a delinquent and a juvenile and a criminal more than I share this all the time, that my story would have changed if somebody would have asked me what happened to me instead of what's wrong with me. At a youth, at a 10-year-old, even in the school system, why do I come to school? So I'm you don't earn. Why am I coming? You know what I mean? There's stuff going on, right? Hey, you look malnutrition, you look like you haven't eaten in months, or whatever that is, or why do you have bruises all over? Everybody thought something was wrong with me. Oh, you're just in that trailer park community. Oh, that's just how they live. That's just, you know what I mean? And if somebody would have asked me what happened to me a long time ago, I probably would have changed.
Too often hiding behind the side of victims, people just not being aware. Since this is a global enterprise and we're talking about Utah today, but we want to make sure those tuning in around the world understand. First of all, a request from a good friend who founded the Trafficking America Task Force, Jerome Milan, who's one of the great advocates for young boys who are trafficked. Jerome's a survivor, and we just want to underscore, we're talking sex trafficking, yes. Most often it's young girls, but so often and too often it's young boys also globally. So I wanted to make sure I honored that for Jerome. He sent that in right now, watching and listening to us. The other thing is we talked about sex and labor, which is the majority, but organ harvesting, illegal adoptions, militia recruitment, underage brides. Utah is ground zero for some of that, or a lot of that. Those are all going on. So when we say trafficking is the fastest growing criminal enterprise globally, it's not just sex and labor, it's a lot of these other things. And the NAICS team handled an international adoption scandal and ring that touched over 20 states in the U.S., but it was emanating out of Arizona and here. Unfortunately, nurses, so you talk about people being aware of January, it was nurses attending to victims who called it in originally, and thank goodness they did. I'm gonna ask two questions because we have about 20 minutes before we go to Q&A, and I want to let you answer whichever one that you want, or both, if you like. So the first question is, how can an average person help? People ask all the time. They're moved when we tell them what's going on. They want to do something, but they don't know what to do. And so it's your chance to plug your own organization if you want and say, hey, we need volunteers, we need help, or talk about it a little more universally. And here's the other question. Utah went from an F from Shared Hope International and their grade in 2012 and 13. 2019, Utah received an A grade. So Shared Hope looks at a lot of things comprehensively: policy, enforcement, resources. What's going well in Utah? How did we get there? The answer is a lot of these folks in here. How did we get here, and what can we do better? I mean, I've heard at least 7 things already that I think we can do better thanks to input from our panelists. But talk about what we've done well, what do you think's going well, what we can do better, and how can an average person lean in and actually make a difference? Can they make a difference? People ask every single day. I'm going to jump over and kind of go to that side. Maybe Renee or Nate, you want to start so that the others can think about. I asked a lot of questions, so I want to give them a chance to think about their answers. So you're the one I care least about offending.
I'm going to start. I need a Nate in
General.
my life so I can just get on. I need a Nate. Can I borrow Nate for a while?
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like I'm about to be exploited.
Well, maybe from your perspective, you were here 10 years ago when no one knew about trafficking, including law enforcement. No one wanted to touch it. It was too hard, too complex. No agencies had any resources. Our community partners were struggling on their own, siloed, without kind of, what's changed? What's good now? Clearly, we have much more to do. So, but A doesn't mean that we're done. That's good. We need a lot more. But we also have done a lot. And I want to acknowledge a lot of people and their efforts from this very room.
Right. So, from my perspective, I think a few things that has helped us as a state is our focus on human trafficking and the investigations and prosecutions of the traffickers. I think we've learned a lot. For example, with the Victor Axe case, which occurred back in 13 and 14. Prior to Victor Axe, there were certain laws in the books that we had to prove certain things for juvenile trafficking, and that made things difficult. And we got together with the legislature, or with legislators, in the aftermath of this case, and we started changing laws. And I think that is one thing that's really helped increase this grade, I suppose. But I think it's helped juveniles, right? We had laws in place where juveniles could be arrested and charged for prostitution. That is no longer the case. Now it's juveniles, if they are involved in a sex act for money, labor trafficking, it has to be investigated. It has to be looked at. So it's little tweaks in the law that has really helped us move forward in attacking the problem. I think the other area is awareness. I think awareness is severely increased over the last several years. Again, we've put a lot of our efforts into training law enforcement so that they can identify things when they see them. For example, I learned a hard lesson as a school resource officer where I had a child in my school. I didn't recognize it at the time, and I wish I would have. But this particular child, a young boy, was being sexually abused, videoed, and put out to the internet for child pornography, which of course is a form of sex trafficking. This young boy was the was behaviorally one of the craziest kids in the school, and he had to be escorted from room to room. He had to, just everything. And instead of saying, digging deeper, what's going on? I dealt with the behavioral things if there were some legal aspects to it, but it's that awareness that dig deeper, identify the signs, and that's what we're trying to do with local law enforcement is to identify that, so that they don't miss the same young boy that I did when I was in the junior high. And I think it's just all those things combined that help us move forward.
Nate, let me brag on you for 1 second, because I've been making you laugh. Once you did have that, let's say you did open that case back then that you should have. In the old days, you would work that case all the way up and wait until the end to bring a victim advocate in. That's just how law enforcement was. And you were part of the change, which really has become a sea change for Utah law enforcement. You brought victim advocates and the RACS case leaders in at the beginning.
Right.
Victims from the very beginning were given, they were presumed to be victims, and then given all the resources, or as many as we possibly could give. Asian Association, others. By the way, we have our own victim advocate who just walked in. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello.
Everybody.
My name is Nora. She's the leader, and it's in Jose Nicholas. And you guys can meet in my office.
Thank you, Nora. But that's a big, for us, that's a big difference. That victims are not re-victimized constantly throughout the process.
Yeah, and we bring Nora in at the ground level during the investigation, so that she's aware of what's going on, so that she can help prepare for when we move on something that she has resources in place immediately, so that we can provide whatever we can provide to help the survivor out of the situation. And to address what can a citizen do real quickly. See something, say something doesn't just work for terrorism. That is more of a terrorism campaign, but it crosses boundaries, right? If you see something that looks weird, say something about it. We operate a tip line, and I would much rather have a tip come in that amounts to nothing than the tip never coming in and we never know. I'd rather be on that side of caution, and we'd rather look at the tip and instead of never receiving it. And so see something, say something. It works on a bunch of different
And in reality, it may not be human trafficking, but very often it's something else, some other criminal enterprise, exploitation, possession. So we've got about 10 minutes before Q&A, so I want to allow everyone else some time. Carlos, do you have perspectives?
Ways that we can learn more is really getting more informed about your local nonprofits that are providing social services to our communities, finding out about who your local victim advocates are. I've worked with Nora a few times now, and it's always been a pleasure to work with you. To put in a quick plug about VOA, like coming down to the Youth Resource Center and coming in volunteering over there so you can actually see who we're serving, what we do, and the different avenues that can be provided to get a youth that's at risk or experiencing homelessness on the plane of accessing the services they can get out of these situations. Please come down and volunteer with us, see what we're doing. We have a lot of robust services that we're able to provide: clinical assistance and support for our clients, housing services, emergency shelter. We've got a diversion team that works really quickly with any of our clients to get them diverted into more appropriate programs or services. That's like a really big thing that we have to really acknowledge with just the shelters in general. I think it's amazing that we have our shelter and what we're able to do there, but the reality of that is that we're also kind of a beacon for predators in regards to there's a bunch of vulnerable and at-risk youth here. And so ideally, it's not the best place for youth that are experiencing any sort of human trafficking to be at, because it's a really quick find on the internet if you just want to go in there and plug in, at-risk youth services. It's going to be one of the first things that pop up. And so things that we can be doing more of is really hardening and creating more shelters and services that are going to be in undisclosed locations so that the perpetrators and predators that are out there can't find them. And that we as a community, I think it's really important for us to recognize that, as much support as we get from our local leaders and our government, it's also important for the community to put forth the efforts to start creating change, whether that's donating to your local nonprofit or being part of some sort of subcommittee or committee that exists out there so that you can learn more and figure out and network with people to start getting funding together to create these services in these places that people need for human trafficking. I think what is going on well is that we do have a lot of awareness going on right now. Like, this is a great way to get the word out and expose what's going on with human trafficking and what we're seeing out there. We need to keep that effort going. And it's nice to hear that there's a lot of training and awareness going on for our local law enforcement departments. And at the same time, our community members need to be doing the same thing. The more effort you put into it, the more you can utilize those tip lines and provide the information that's needed in those tip lines so that then law enforcement can go and follow up on those things and do their jobs. Remember that somebody that is acting on any sort of human trafficking that is coming from the predatory or the perpetrator stance, they are smart people. They know exactly what they're doing. They know how to hide. They know how to stay in the shadows. And they know how to stay out of the community's eyes and law enforcement's eyes. And so the more we all know together, the more we can be aware of what's going on around us, and we can start to take action and do things. And so, yes, this is also a community issue in regards to like what we can do to really step up our level in regards to just having that awareness, insight, so that we can take action. Awareness and insight is the first step, and then we need to take action from there. And so I invite everybody here, anybody that's watching, anybody that's interested in learning about human trafficking, like, put yourself in that situation where you're going to learn more, because the more you learn, the more you can.
Great call to action, Carlos. I hope everybody's listening to that. And we absolutely need more people involved, but we also want to recognize we have great partners like Truckers Against Trafficking with that whole industry, airline ambassadors, training airline personnel, hotel heroes. If you have a business and you want to be involved, reach out to us, reach out to one of the panelists. We all need your help and support. We need more individuals, more businesses, more industries leading in. I wanted to finish with our survivors because I think they have the most important stories to tell. And so we've got the balance of our time, and if we need to eat into some of the Q&A time to give you, the time you need, Renee or January. Feel free to talk about what I asked or whatever you feel in your heart you want to share.
I just want to touch on, you said like maybe 10 years ago that you thought you didn't have a problem with trafficking.
Oh, no.
No,
That's how I did.
They weren't aware.
Yeah.
Okay,
10
you
years
weren't
ago,
aware.
we were.
Okay, you weren't aware.
We were
Okay.
behind.
So I just want to say, when I was trafficked, it was in the 70s, and it was on 2nd South between 4th and 6th West, and it was just like an old juke joint spot back then. So it was going on way back then. Funding is a huge thing. Journey of Hope lives off of grants. We thrive off of grants, and funding is a big thing. So we can help the ladies that we help. When we get the phone call that a trafficking victim, or when Laura calls, or January calls, I jump into action. Well, we all jump into action. But mainly me and Shannon Cox jump into action and see what we can do for these ladies, get them safely put somewhere. Because if you take a lady from the street and kind of like change her thinking and get her put safe somewhere, she's going to thrive. She's going to really thrive. As long as she feels safe and she knows she has a voice, she's going to thrive. So funding helps a lot in that situation.
I don't know if anybody is aware of us. Like, we're a really small grassroots, ran off volunteers and donations only. We're a night street outreach program that does with harm reduction strategies, where we're an approved rent exchange program and in the state of Utah. And we bridge the gap with being a night resource in these high-risk, low-end community and areas and camps and hotels, and we meet people where they're at. Like, we go knocking on their door. We go into their area. We do not, we don't have an office. We don't have an intake. We don't have an assessment. We don't have employees. all of our volunteers kind of go through an orientation program through us. We have a lot of survivors on our team that are from addiction, molestation, domestic violence, trafficking, exploitation, and we're out every night. You know, we have certain locations that we go. We have never missed really our big outreach on Tuesday in 3 years. Never missed a Tuesday and gone to the same places. So consistency has been huge. And it takes about a year or 2 years to get somebody to trust you that's in exploitation, trafficking, domestic violence, even addiction, to say, hey, I'm worth this, and mattered it. And we mostly work with community partners. We go out with doctors on our outreach and provide absolute wound care, abscess care, STD, all that stuff right then and there. We go, recently we've been working with the vaccination street out team, getting this population vaccinated. I met Nora through a case last year that I threw a fit on how victims were treated, and that's how I got kind of involved with working with other partners, and been invited where there is cases that we come in when law enforcement is taking a girl out, and we come in and provide her blanket and hygiene and makeup in a hotel room and get her resources. I've gotten probably about 7 girls out of state into treatment this year, out of pocket, you know, and all of us, everything comes in, but we provide hygiene and wound care and condoms, and you know, and like I said, we believe if you don't combat local trafficking, you're never going to combat human trafficking. And for me, I'll be honest with you, I'm a survivor of a lot, right? The criminal system, trafficking, poverty, homelessness. I became my own trafficker. I learned how to sell myself really well and become an object. Domestic violence, my first daughter being murdered, my second daughter being addicted. I come from complex trauma, right? So getting to healing was a long time. It took a long time to get here. And I don't know if I do it easy, you know? I almost have 15 years in recovery, and it's a vulnerable being out there sometimes, and being in the mix of it all, and learning my place, and learning not to react, and being emotionally safe. And I need some training sometimes, right? I've met some people like I wanted to slap the shit out of, right at the moment, and I wanted to hurt women, like, come on, let me take you out of here. You know, I'm not a rescue team, and I don't force women out. But I think the hugest thing that I can think of in any spectrum is get involved in your local nonprofits. They're struggling, they need support, but the other part is start inviting survivors to the table. And this is a huge step. Even at trainings for law enforcement, invite survivors to the table to give their perception. You will never believe, the untold stories that will never make it to your office is, I recently got a girl out of here that was, trafficked with the religion that's here for a long time. A well-known real estate agent that runs a lot of Airbnbs. You would be amazed at the women's traffickers, who they are, that you sit at the table with when you go to, Ruth Chris eating dinner. You know what I mean? That are, and then there's the low-end pimps, and the survival sex, and there's survival need, and addiction, and just getting involved in, and plus too, what I think Utah's doing different is, which I'm really proud of, and to be with Nora and these two, is that we started a Victim Services Human Trafficking Subcommittee, and Renee's the chair, I'm the co-chair, Carlos is on it, Laura is here, and there's probably about 14 organizations that are involved in that, and it's a work group, and we're trying to figure out how we can do wraparound services, how we can open this door to make changes, work with everybody, and because if you think you're the one for a victim, you are doing that victim harm. It takes a village to help a victim, and it starts at ground zero. And so that committee is starting. It's through the AG office. It's building. We're in motion, and there's fluidity, and there's transparency, and there's movement with it. And it's cool that there's all kinds of doors open when I need stuff about youth that I don't know what, like, how do I approach this person, or, you know, women from, you know, the correction system, or Nora's like, hey, can you meet me at midnight at a hotel room and help me with this victim, and or whatever, you know, or if I call Laura and I'm like, I don't know what to do, you know, I'm over it. I feel frustrated and I need to hand it off, right? Like, I need to hand it off, or I'm in my own transference, right? Where I'm like, I'm going to do harm because now I want to protect her and hold her and keep her isolated and not let anybody see her, you know. And so that committee is growing in the state of Utah as the first ever committee in the state of Utah specific for victim services of human trafficking. So if you want to get involved with that, talk to Nora after. But we all have, obviously, we all have websites. We all have organizations that we support, and it's important to get involved. Be the one, right? Be the one to say something. Be the one movement is huge. Like, be the person. Like, even if it's weird and you're riding the tracks to your work and you saw this girl and there was older men around her and she looks 12, how about you just call the tip line and be like, hey, there's a young girl on 2nd and 2nd, surrounded by some older men. Like, maybe you want to go check it out, right? Maybe you want to go check it out. Be that one. Hey, I see a kid after school going over to a neighbor's house, and the mom works till 6, but the dad's been getting home earlier than everybody, and all the kids are running over there because he has candy and food and, you know, movie time. Like, be that one to say, hey, like, I think there's something going on. All of a sudden, all these kids are over at this house, mom's not there, some weird shit's happening. Do you know what I mean? Like, like, be that one. Like, be that one. And so, that's my soapbox. I'm going to shut up now.
No, that's why you're here. And we all feel the sincerity and the care and the honesty and the vulnerability to be able to put yourself out like that and talk about complex trauma, and that you're probably have a lifetime of recovery that you're dealing with. We never want you to feel alone. And I think that's part of the problem. A lot of us working in this sometimes feel isolated, like, who do I call, what do I do? So I'm so glad that we have this subcommittee. Please lean on each other. Let us know. The more we communicate, the more we know how we can help. Let me ask you this, because I think listeners or viewers might want to know this. You're not talking about a $10 million annual budget. You're talking about you take a little bit of money and you do a whole lot of good with it. What's your, if you don't mind sharing, like, annual budget for the soap to help? I mean, because I think if people know that, they're like, oh, I can make a difference. And if I give $50 or I give $100 or I can, and you can get people. I don't solicit for specific organizations, but I can lead people, hopefully, to
I don't know.
that they need to.
I don't really know about.
Do
I mean, we take donations, but literally, like I'm telling you, $5 with our organization is life or death for some of these women that are going to lose everything. Like, even a low-end hotel that they're paying $80 for. I've never paid $80 for this. Almost that place. You know what I mean?
Our training was good.
But like, that could be life or death of them not having stability, or, you know, the shelters. And sometimes all the shelters are full. And DV shelters right now are massively full, which is, where do you put these people? And so we, you know, access where I mean, most of us sometimes come out of pocket and we reach out on Facebook, like, can we just pay for a hotel for this girl for the night so we can get her to maybe report or meet with another organization to do that. So like $5 is huge for us.
So that's our point. You can make a difference.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone can make a difference. Volunteering,
yeah.
a little bit of money, a lot of care. Educate yourself, educate others. Can we have a huge round of applause for our panelists? Being here, for participating, for being willing to put their stories out. We do have a little bit of time for, and if you need to leave, I understand, because we're kind of creeping up on the allotted time. But I'm staying here until we at least get some questions answered. And
I thought there was free food, so I'll stay.
Well, we can arrange it. Can we order pizzas quickly?
I'm just kidding.
How about we order the pizzas and then you take them to whomever that you think can use them the best? Right? You, Rick, can you make it happen? Thanks. Questions? Let's open it up. And by the way, it's intimidating. There's more expertise here in this room on human trafficking than there is probably in many countries around the world. So that's a testament to how great our community is in rallying to this cause. But anyone?
I have a question.
Yes.
Just put this to you.
I guess I'm with PTA, and part of our focus has been education. We actually have an MOU with 3 strands, and I know that they're doing training in schools, and one of the things we're working on is going to be trying to get students trained. That's probably too much. But what more can we do? Because I see this thing, and honestly, I'm not comfortable going out at night and doing things. That's not my, I apologize, I am a suburbanite, and I feel comfortable in my own little world. But I feel like I want to do more than just try to, education is power, and so I feel like we're doing that, but it feels like we're missing. And honestly, I've been to meetings and at the Volunteers of America Youth place. I've been to meetings there, and every time I go there, I'm frightened to park and go in. And I'm ashamed to admit that. Do you know what I mean? But I feel like there should be something more I could do, something I could reach out. And so I guess I'm saying, what do you want? Average, everyday suburbanite moms? Because I have a plethora of those that might do something.
Army and softball, ready to mobilize.
I'm gonna mobilize them.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I totally understand where your fear is coming from, and I would encourage you to come down again, and I will give you the tour personally myself. Okay, but one of the things that's really helpful and things that we can do specifically for youth is continue to educate them, just like you were saying, Ray. And so things that we've done in the past for our center is we've actually had sex trafficking groups for our clients. And we do it at a different time of the day, so that way they don't have to come in and everybody knows that they're going to the sex trafficking group and that's something that they're having to navigate. But anybody that really is open to coming down and providing those types of services for our clients, I am 100% open to that. And the thing that can be scary about coming down to any sort of resource center that's targeting homelessness is there's a lot of things going on and there's a lot of different people. I would say that with youth specifically, one of the things that they don't have, youth that are experiencing homelessness or that are at risk, is there's a lack of consistency for them. They don't live in a world that's consistent. They live in a world that's chaos, and they're having to survive from one day to the next. And so the more people that are willing to step up and come down and participate in educating them or providing services for them, they will see that and it will go so far for them, because then they start to feel like they are part of this community. They start to feel like they are normal, and that people that are not like them are going to come down and talk with them and engage with them and meet with them and see them. And so please don't be ashamed of what you're feeling right now. Okay, please take my hand and I will chaperone you around. I will walk you around the building. We'll do it together. But part of this, the fear, is that we sometimes feel like we have to do this by ourselves. And so let's not do this by ourselves anymore. Let's do this as a community. Let's do this within the nonprofit organizations. Let's do this within our governments, and let's just be together on this and hold our hands.
Anybody else want to address the question? Because I've got a response to it. No, please, you're the panelist.
And there's so many left.
Sure enough.
Sharon from PTA.
Well, and specifically the safety commissioner, so I'm over trying to keep the same.
So, I grew up in the hood in LA, and now I live in your neighborhood, right, like suburban America. I want you to be involved. I want you to see the reality of what's going on there. But here's the real reality. Your kids are getting trafficked in suburbia. And there's stuff you can do without leaving your house. And there's stuff in schools. If you take away the avenues that the perpetrators use most to groom and traffic, it's a big deal. It helps us. If you can cut it off, or at least chase it, or minimize it, it makes our job, for law enforcement, a lot easier. What am I talking about? When was the last time every school in your school district or your neighborhood invited just parents, even without the kids, to sit and talk about internet safety, and maybe have Michelle come and train them and give them solutions and techniques. I guarantee you every single one of them, just like me and my wife, are struggling with, do I give my kid a cell phone? What kind? Is it a Gap wireless one that's, or is it, what's going on? They're getting bombarded with, at 5, 6, 7 years old, with pornography everywhere. And look, just all kinds of tools. Traffickers will exploit the most innocent photos. You don't have to be putting pictures of your stuff or anything else on. They will take an innocent picture and morph it onto a body of a young lady who's without her clothes, and then they'll leverage that into they'll come and say, look, I've got this picture of you. I'll send it to your parents' work. Your dad will lose his job. I'll send it to your pastor, and your family will be embarrassed. Any kind of stuff. Send me some real photos back, and I'll get rid of this one. Or I've got this of your sister, and victims are willing to do anything to protect those that they love, and they'll sacrifice themselves. So send me some photos of yourself, and I'll get rid of this so your sister's not shamed or embarrassed or ideating suicide. And then they do, and then after that they work it into some videos, and pretty soon they're in the life. And my point is, there's so much we can do in suburbia. You don't have to go down there. I do want you to go, but talk to us about what we can do in your own schools, in your own neighborhoods, and educating and waking everybody up there, because our kids in suburbia are getting trafficked almost as much as kids anywhere else.
Yeah, I would like to add something. Sorry, I'm taking a place of something else, but I want to add something. We have seen, I'm a case manager, and I have seen a lot of labor trafficking in the suburbia with minors and adults. But with minors, there is a trend that people bringing kids from abroad to, I'm your tia, your auntie, or I'm going to bring you here to study English, and I want to provide everything for you, and sometimes nobody provides for those kids, and they are kept as slaves in the house. They get different treatment than the other kids. So if you see that in a house where a lot of kids live, and this kid is not going to school, why the kid is not going to school, why they don't have the proper clothes for winter, why a kid has to go around wearing flip-flops, not talking the language, sometimes starving, with wounds that haven't been taken care of. So those are things that you can look at, and I have had those cases, and those have occurred in the suburbia too. Sorry, it wasn't my grace, but...
Good, great resource, great answer, thank you. Any other questions for the panelists? Nate, are you reading one from?
Yes, from our live stream, they said, ask Renee about her recent interaction with the federal law enforcement agents. As an example of those involved, start by believing.
Is it good or bad? Because to be clear, Nate's not federal law enforcement.
I don't know how, okay, so, I was at I'm gonna say reception, and it was there, and the head guy, top cop, came up and was talking to me, and he was asking me, like, what's your story? And so I kind of told him, can't hear me? I kind of told him that I was trafficked in the 70s, and he was like, no, you weren't. We didn't have that in the 70s. Okay, so I just walked away because I didn't want the older day to come out and do something to him, so I just walked away. And I told my boss, I told people, yeah, but so that's see, because if he didn't believe it, then how am I supposed to feel that other cops who are coming into action with believe what I'm saying? You know what I mean?
And that's part of the training and awareness that we're trying to do is have law enforcement officials believe, right?
Yeah.
And don't fall victim to the stereotypes that are out there and look at things a little differently. There's one other thing I wanted to touch on. So the Utah Attorney General's office hosts the Utah Trafficking in Persons Task Force. And if there's one thing I've learned through what we call UTIP, is the multidisciplinary team approach. A lot of times people look at trafficking situations or criminal situations, all criminal situations, as a law enforcement problem. Human trafficking isn't just a law enforcement problem. It's going to take that multidisciplinary team approach. It's going to take folks like those here in front of you, like all of you that are here to attack this problem. Law enforcement can't do it on their own. And we've been very successful in holding traffickers accountable because of people sitting here today, all around us. And I think when we're talking about what Utah is doing right, I think that is one thing that Utah is 100% doing right, is we're working together to attack this problem. And we just need to continue to do so. Anyway, so I want to plug you to what I've learned through my years being involved.
Let Renee know that many of us in law enforcement do know that this has been going on, not just back to the 70s, it's been going on since mankind started. I mean,
Right.
trafficking and slavery has persisted. It's just that recently we've started to stop blaming the victims. Right? Society's been taking ownership and really holding accountable the people who are the real villains in all of this. But again, to put it in context, some people don't realize this. First of all, they say, well, slavery's ended. There's no such thing as slavery. Well, that's not true at all. I mean, any one of these survivors here can tell you that is not the case. Legalized slavery may be abolished in certain forms, but every single country in this world has human trafficking going on, and every state in this union has human trafficking going on. It's real, it exists, and during the 300 or 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade, you're talking about tens of millions of people being, their lives ruined, rooted out from their cultures and their people, and separated and tortured. Horrible blight on our nation's history. But if you think about what's happening as we sit here today around the world, many more times than that, of people today who are equally victimized by modern day slavery. And so we have to wake up. It's incumbent. You got to get out of your comfort zone, not you specifically here, but you got to help wake people up and get them out of their comfort zone. And I think hearing stories like this, the real, is one way. I hope everybody out there who's watching this, that you'll send this out, retweet it, whatever way that you are an influencer, please use that influence to wake people up and raise awareness. Other questions that we have? We get a little passionate about this here in our office. Yes.
Yes.
Otra vez, no?
Otra vez. My question is for Carlos. You spoke about some shelters that are going to be open in the valley in the next few months, probably. I don't know. Are those shelters going to be for male survivors too? I have been having, mainly I work with males, but sometimes with females. And sometimes I don't have a place to put these guys that come scared from horrible situations, that they come probably from small villages in Latin America. They just speak Spanish. And sometimes I call the shelters and the domestic violence shelters, and I experience a no. And I don't have a place to put them, and they get scared. They just speak Spanish. And sometimes we tend to think it's just labor trafficking, but they suffer violence there, and even sexual violence in those places. So it's very traumatic for them, and they suffer too. So that's my question. And also, I want to make a remark. Thank you to the detectives in the AG's office for being so approachable. All my survivors, the Spanish speakers, because it's mainly the population that I work with, but they are so approachable. Always I can tell my clients, my friends are going to talk to you. You can trust in them, and they are always available. They are friendly, and they don't feel threatened. So I wanted to just say thank you to the detectives at the AG's office for being so nice and dedicated and passionate about seeing these invisible people, because sometimes we see them and we think they are just working, or like someone told me a few days ago, they know that they come here to work, they signed up for it, yeah, but they didn't sign to be abused. They came to work, not to be abused. But I'm sorry, I went out of the topic and I had this question.
So, Una punta de clarificación, perdón. Just one point of clarification was that I'm saying that there needs to be more efforts in regards to providing shelters. Just
Oh,
saying
sorry.
that. Yeah, so, yes, we need more shelters specifically for people that are experiencing human trafficking victims, right? One thing that you can do right now with shelters that exist, and specifically speaking about a lot of these like homeless shelters or resource centers, right, is if you are trying to get a victim connected with shelter services, then ask to speak with their program manager, with their diversion department, with their director, so that you can get maybe prioritize access to those shelters, and then you're also having that communication of providing anonymity to this person and making sure that it's undisclosed and things like that. When we have somebody that's a victim of human trafficking and they're in the resource center areas, those resource centers we're always communicating with each other. So if, for example, they are a youth or a young adult and between the ages of like 18 to 22 and they end up at like the men's resource center or the women's resource center, that can be a lot for them, right? Because they're youth, right? And that those spaces may not be the best for them. So feel free to just call me, and you can call the Youth Resource Center. Yeah, you can email me, and we can figure things out so that we can get them connected with like victims advocate. We can get them connected with January if that's something that we need to look at doing. But we can start that communication. We can get that going. I think one of the things that we see right now is that we just don't have enough shelters for people that are experiencing human trafficking in Utah. And so in regards to like getting those people the services that they need as far as shelter goes, a lot of that's going outside of the state. And in some regards that is safer because then there's somewhere where the trafficker's not going to know where they're at. But you know, I think Utah could also do their part in providing those spaces for people in other states and children in the state as well.
Carlos is right. I think Utah's biggest failure right now in terms of human trafficking, addressing that issue. I can tell you I've been in many third world countries that do a better job of protecting, sheltering, supporting, healing victims and survivors than Utah is currently. We do have to export most, and we work with great partners like Sanctuary and Texas. I can give you a list of 20 different shelters or so that we've worked with, but we haven't been able to build that big shelter here or that initiative. 8 years we've been trying. We've gotten close on different fronts. I do want to let you know right now we're working with groups like the Malou Foundation because they have a lot of resources and a lot of land and a lot of there's a lot of opportunity. It's something we're working on, but Carlos is absolutely right now. We don't, and it keeps me up at night. I mean, working for that, and one of the reasons our whole team, I ran again was because I want to see that happen before I leave office. But I think I'm getting the stares from the back of the room. Do we have one more question one more time?
Yes, one question from the live stream is, how can members of our audience reach each of you panelists and contact you personally?
You might not want to give out your phone number, but is there a website?
Journey of Hope has a website. It's a Journey of Hope Inc. or journeyofhopeutah.org. And yeah, my story's on there. That's why I really don't tell my story because it's on there. And you can read my story.
You can, our organization is #2 Hope, UT.com or January at soaptohopeut.com. It's really easy to get a hold of us. Our Facebook, we have Instagram. We have all kinds of ways to access, but yeah, we're Soap #2 Hope.
So with Volunteers of America, you can always go to voaut.org and you can look at the list of services that we have. VOA Utah has a lot of different services that we provide in the state. And then for the Youth Resource Center and me specifically, you can always email me at carlos.garcia@voaut.org. I'm okay with my cell phone. It's my work cell phone. So if you need that, it's 801-628-4825. feel free to send me a text or give me a call. I'd be happy to communicate with you and see how we can collaborate and just be a team together.
And if you need to get a hold of the investigation division to address a trafficking situation, you can always call 801-281-1200. You can ask for me, but anyone answering that phone will get you to the right person.
The tip line.
What's that?
Is that the tip line?
That is not the tip line. That is the phone number to our division.
Oh, yeah. Do we have a tip line?
We have a statewide tip line, and you have the national Polaris human trafficking hotline. Unfortunately, I don't have those two numbers memorized. Anna might, and she just
Nate.
left. I know.
Hey, you're gonna get demoted today, bud.
It's already in hot water. But yeah, you can reach out to us. I give my number out to people all the time, but working with survivors, I know, can be a trigger, and people got it, you need to respect. But you can reach out to us on the AG website or any of our hotlines. Any last questions or remarks?
I have a national tip line number, and any tip that involves Utah will come to us through this national number. That's 888-373-7888.
You're incredibly
Lord.
impressive right now.
Wait. There you go.
That's the Polaris number, isn't it?
1-888-373-7888.
That's the one. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your participation. Let's give our panelists one more round of applause. Thank you, Anna Fletcher. Thanks to all of our partners, to the state legislature, for the resources they've given us, the governor's office, for their support here in Utah. There's a reason why people call Utah the tip of the spear in the fight against human trafficking. It's because of you. It's because of you all watching. We've done, I think, great work over the last number of years, but there's so much more that we still have to do, like sanctuary type resources. So keep fighting out there, and know that we have your backs. And y'all take care. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. God bless.